Professor Kolbrener, it is a great pleasure to see you. I've seen you in faculty meetings, and I'm following what you are doing in the impressive and important content you're putting out. It's so important for us to maintain this connection. It is good to see you live. I'll start with the same question I'm asking students. How are you?
I just wanted to emphasize that to the students, that we do get together a lot, and that's really important.
Virtually.
Virtually, right. Meaning we wanted to really emphasize that it's not like you're in this crazy situation and we're in this normal situation. We're also in this crazy situation, and we're doing what we can to support each other. And we talked about this, Dr. Feldman talked about this earlier. We want to definitely support you as well. So yes, it's good to see you.
Likewise. The question I've been asking everyone when I start class, I think this is not just a sense of being polite, but really how are things going? And you live in a community that has its own challenges. You also have a busy home. How are things going for you, and how are you getting through this?
That's actually a very long chapter in a book, right? I live in a community which is mostly mostly Haredim people would call ultra-Orthodox, and I have been kind of like Jeremiah in the neighborhood, and they didn't listen to Jeremiah, and they're not listening to me. I just passed by one of the rabbis in the shul in the building here, and he said hello to me, and I said, because I have been sending him things for the past 2 weeks about how we should close down his shul, and I just said to him, and I felt really good about it, and bad in the same way. I said, I'm not talking to you anymore. I've had it. Meaning some people you really can't help, but it's very important just to take the flip side of that. Just to recommend to everybody we love and we care about to be prudent is very, very, very important.
And I'm sure that you are abiding, and I've been doing the same with my own family. I don't have any communal role where I live, but
I don't either.
Although my kids do shout it. I've noticed my kids have started to shout from our mirpeset to people, to passersby down the street. I'm just going to close the window because it might create some interference for the audio. And that message of the Jeremiah role is, of course, universal. Cassandra certainly identified. I've invited Professor Kolbrener, I've invited you here to talk a little bit about the material that we're studying now in 303, a class that is slowly, and this would have happened anyway, it's slowly morphing into a counterpart to the historical backgrounds class that you teach first years. This is the capstone class to the structured part of our English literature program. And it's kind of not historical, but contemporary backgrounds. How did the world that we live in come into being? It's the world of the early modern, which did begin primarily in Britain, England. And we've talked already in this class about Hobbes and the tumultuous events of the mid and late 17th century, the period that you actually know best of everyone on the English faculty. And so I thought it'd be useful to have you here. I've shifted emphasis over this semester, and you and I have been forthright about this. We knew this was going to be a semester of crisis, a semester in which teaching and reading and humanities and understanding our place in the world actually becomes, if anything, more urgent. I've been reading the most influential book of one of my teachers, one of my own professors, Shoshana Feldman's Testimony. And I'll be talking after the Passover vacation, such as vacation will be, about what Shoshana writes in this, about Camus' writing. I just want to share one thing with you. I didn't tell you about this before.
Wait. So Camus, who wrote the plague?
Camus, a mid 20th century Algerian French author who wrote several works, and one of his most important works is called The Plague. This is the main work that I'm asking students to read over Passover. If they have any opportunity to read it, it is impossible we're doing. I've been trying to prepare for class. I told students yesterday, I just did not have time to prepare yesterday. It's difficult what we're doing. We're here to support each other, have some compassion for ourselves and for each other. What I want to say with you, and then we're going to turn back to Britain in the 17th century, the period in which the world comes into being. I've been looking back on that period of the British 1650s and on, and the crisis after crisis that befell that era, and realizing these ideas about the self, society, the state, politics that we're going to talk about in a few minutes are born of personal experience. They're not abstract ideas, just as the world is changing under the feet of our students and ourselves. What Shoshana Feldman, my teacher, writes in her chapter 4 of Testimony. I don't know if you have that on that bookshelf that really is behind you, not the London of the 15th century, somewhere. Is that history is a kind of narration of event after event. History is not less what happened than the narration of what happened. And narrative we usually think of as a kind of story about the past, a story of things that occurred. And in this central chapter of Testimony, Shoshana is trying to think about, Professor Feldman is trying to think about the relationship between history and narrative, between books and events, stories, and personal experience, especially tumultuous or life-changing or world-altering experience. And she's trying to understand how narrative goes through some kind of revolution, some transformation during the major crisis of the last century, the 20th century, World War II and the Holocaust, and how a story of plague, a pest, the plague by Camus, came out of that experience as a kind of wrestling with narrative. And that's what we're going to talk with them later. And that's kind of been my motivation. That's my lens for what I'm doing in teaching this semester, for how I'm understanding the world of literature that we are very fortunate to live in, about how narrative and history, how events, sometimes events of emergency and crisis, like world-altering events, and books, stories, language interact.
Give me 1 second. I want to just quiet things in my house, okay?
Sure. So I'll keep talking to the students. So what I'm going to do now with this, I'm going to do now with Professor. That's a little more clear version of what I've said to you guys, to the students, to you in the introduction to yesterday's class on Monday, March 23rd, and on a few occasions. I think nothing's more important in our intellectual. Obviously, the most important thing is that we stay calm, that we stay sane, stay fed, stay safe and healthy. But that's my approach to what it is that we're doing. Locke. Last week we read about Hobbes and the formation of the state, the nature of society and the individual. And I'm just reading all these texts. And I would have been doing this anyway with the students, but I have added also, you know this, I've been adding some plague reading to our syllabus to have a sense that there are people who've lived through this. There's kind of consolation in knowing that, and people have responded in various ways, as we all respond in our way. We read about Leviathan, we read about Hobbes. This week, I'm trying to figure out a good way to do Locke, and that's why I'm very grateful to you that you took up the invitation to discuss this. I read the second treatise on government. I'm still not done with the letter on toleration. So we can talk about the second treatise, which is the foundational document for the American Constitution. It's where phrases that all of us know, life, liberty, and he calls it property, the American Thomas Jefferson changed it to the pursuit of happiness. It comes from the second treatise.
That's a very interesting substitution, right?
It's a good edit. I'm doing, everything that I'm doing, I know you're doing this in your class also, is trying to make this meaningful for students. We don't want people just sitting, listening to us.
For sure.
It's boring to sit in front of Zoom. I know it, you know it. Listening also to YouTube can be deadening. Hopefully this kind of conversation that you and I are having is a little bit more engaging. What I saw in reading this, and that's why I want to share some of my responses to reading Locke. They're not all going to read it. I'll share with them a few portions, and I'll share them with you about how a larger society, a larger group of people, and I can turn to a text. I'll turn to the text if that's helpful, but I also want, it's not here, and this is Matan. Say hi. I don't think he's made an appearance in class yet. Everyone, you'll get to see him soon. He's taken to wearing his tzitzit like a chassid the last couple of days, as he's been out of school. I don't know. It's probably in the Machzan, and we're not going to get it right
now. I think, this is a little instructive. I said this to my seminar students as well. The fact that my house is making noise, not blood curdling.
Oh, and here's Matan.
Part of what we're doing, right?
I said he's been dressed like a chassid. He's been wearing tzitzit on the outside for the past week since he hasn't had to go to school. He's now taken to,
nice.
I don't know, Munkach very well when he comes back.
But we need an extension cord for
I can't help you right now, sorry.
We don't have.
Not in the house. I'm not going to the Machzan in the public area anytime soon.
Yeah.
All right, so we could talk in general. I maybe be helpful.
Can I just weigh in on something that you already
Absolutely. So I'm throwing the floor to you. I just want to know how to trigger, how to get you going.
First of all, I love Locke, and I'm actually reading his book, The Essay Concerning Human Understanding, which is about how
his major work on
his major work about how people actually, how they learn and how they understand the world. It's a very big book. I think I have it right here, right?
It's pull it out of London. There it comes.
There it is.
Yeah. Or maybe is that Firenze or is it London? I can't tell what's behind you.
No, that's London. Yeah, 17th century London.
London. Okay, so there it comes out of the middle of the river.
And one of the things that's really fascinating about Locke is that all of his work are really, they all are moving in the same direction. That his very conservative ideas about what people can understand and know, meaning Locke in the essay really shows the limits of human knowledge. And I was thinking about what Dr. Feldman was saying about narration and event and this being personal. Locke and his generation were living after the English Civil Wars, which we studied together, many of us, between 1643 or 45 or whatever and 1660, which was an upheaval. And there was that sense of, from Locke, or you see in Locke's work, as Dr. Feldman was saying, it is a reaction to that period and an attempt not to go back there, an attempt to avoid the sectarian struggle, the fights between religious people. So his writing was also extremely personal. There was tremendous anxiety about that period and the idea we must move on from this now. And of course, it was 1689, the revolution of 1680, 1689, which is really a liberal revolution, and in some sense more important for the history of the West. I mean, in the civil wars were a time of great upheaval, but 1689 represents the kind of when they brought in William from Holland to reign over England, the Protestant monarch. That was a sense in which England was being radically changed, but really being made in the ways that Dr. Feldman was alluding to before. Just this is the beginning of modern liberal society.
And so to simplify things, he's just for the students who, I'll try to make them a little more familiar with what you're referring to as the glorious, a political revolution, like the Arab Spring. It wasn't a violent, but a political revolution that occurred in 1689, when the king was deposed, or the heir was really excluded is what happens. James II wanted to appoint his son. There was fear that the country would become staunchly Catholicized with a kind of intolerance for anyone who wasn't Catholic. There were fears about making the army a Catholic force, and Parliament Parliament succeeded in what became known as the Glorious Revolution in installing a king brought in from outside the country, William, with his wife Mary, William and Mary, who were much more moderate Protestants, and the world of England averted what Locke saw as another crisis. And what you're saying is he is someone who is always trying to, he's designing a better form of society. He looks back on the disasters of his lifetime, especially his early life. He was 10 years old when the Civil War broke out. He was 17 when the king was executed.
Wow. And
same age as so many of our students, impressionable ages, college years. He was in college he was a young man just before the fire and the plague. And we cannot, as you're saying, we cannot go back to this. There has to be a better alternative of how to organize ourselves, what society should look like. I'm going to go for the students' sake to show a little bit of the text. This is the introduction to the both treatises. We're calling it the second treatise, but of course that means there are two treatises. And the first treatise, you can look at, Bill, you can check out what's here. Where are you? I want to see your picture. But it says here very, very clearly, to justify to the world the people of England whose love of their just and natural rights, we can talk about that, we should talk about what that means, the natural rights, with their resolution to preserve them. It's all about preservation, maintaining what works, getting rid of what doesn't, save the nation when it was on the very brink of slavery and ruin. He really saw that to him was a real danger. The collapse of government would have meant slavery and ruin. And in this latter highlighted section,
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question about
oh,
that?
there you are. Now I see it. Good.
So, you know, I was just thinking, if it were Milton, he would write whose love of their just and natural liberty. He would not write rights, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could talk about what, I mean, you said you were about to. What does it mean to talk about rights? What are natural rights? What does that mean?
Good. So, you know, what is the state of affairs? This is something, I mean, I'd really be glad if you could help me understand this. This is the beginning of the second treatise.
Okay.
The second treatise begins with that language, that rhetoric of natural rights. And it starts from the same place that, you know, our class, our students in my course will be familiar with, having already read Hobbes or parts of Hobbes.
Well, you see, right? The first line here is he's punching Hobbes in the face, basically.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the bottom one, the longer one on the bottom is definitely punching Hobbes in the face. He departs importantly from Hobbes, but it begins with the same idea that there is something natural, and the natural state of affairs is not God-given absolute monarchy.
Right. Okay. Right.
There was a natural state. Adam hath not, either by natural right of fatherhood, right, or by gift of God. God doesn't install all the kings, and God doesn't create absolute power. And there's this natural situation in which people. And this is overturning the ancient world. Go ask, you know, the rulers of Pharaoh and the rulers of Mesopotamia. Hierarchy, supremacy of certain families and houses, authority, absolute authority. That is the natural state of affairs, and it is confirmed by divine right. Here, Hobbes and this,
right.
It is not the natural state of affairs. Natural state of affairs is absolute liberty. And where is that? Here it is. The second bit. What is the state of nature then? We can jump into this.
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Absolutely, go interrupt as you will.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure where you heard me before. So I just wanted to correct my misreading, because I thought at first that first paragraph was punching the Hobbes in the face, but it's really not the case. Meaning they're both agreeing that there is no kind of natural authority given to, as you just said. I mean, exactly. Hobbes is really the first person to do what you're attributing to Locke right here, getting rid of all of those older assumptions about the nature of authority and the nature of rulership. But they are really agreeing together there is a natural state of affairs. They have a very different way of understanding what that was.
And just to be clear, what is the natural state of affairs? You called it, I mean, Milton has another word for it also.
The state of nature.
I'm sorry?
State of nature, or is that
what is the state of nature? The state of nature to me seems clear that it is freedom, liberty.
Okay.
Right? That's a very powerful statement, and it comes from these believers who are on the cusp. I mean, maybe you want to talk about this. They're all religious in some way, but they have a different form of religion than had been. You know, it's not the kind of calcified or received religion of Catholicism, which has a huge hierarchy. It is a state of affairs in which they strongly believe that God created nature. They're not secularists. They're not atheists. Locke, as you know better than I do, hated atheism. But that God created us free. God loves liberty. Right? Am I wrong about that?
I'm waiting for the next paragraph. I think.
Okay. So here's where, I mean, we can go through this, and there's the state of nature. I want to get to in a second, but you're absolutely right. I mean, this is quite famous. He has an important discussion or disagreement with Machloket. He has an important disagreement with Hobbes, and he puts it on the first page. This is the longer paragraph at the bottom here, highlighted. All these premises It is impossible that rulers now on earth should make any benefit or derive any least shadow of authority from that which is held to be the fountain of all power, Adam's private dominion and paternal jurisdiction, so that it is impossible that the world is set up in such a chaotic way that of cruel rulers lording it over others, so that he will not give just occasion to think that all government in the world is the product only of force and violence. Government, power, cannot only be created by the strongest ruling over the weak. That is unfathomable. That is impossible to Locke. That is, of course, what the state of affairs is to Leviathan, to Hobbes, that we create this extremely powerful body who keeps everyone else in line by force and violence. Rather, to Locke, who believes in reason, toleration, empiricism, rationality, men live together not by the rule of beasts, where the strongest carries it, and so lay a foundation for perpetual disorder and mischief. The natural state of affairs is not, to Locke, one of war versus one another. Rather, it's something else. We are guided by self-interest, but to Locke, it is enlightened self-interest. And I wrote my notes here. I'm trying to figure out how to access it. It is here. Contra Hobbes, who assumes anarchy reduces humans to a bestial state. Hobbes says you might be guided by self-interest, by enlightenment. Others, your neighbor might be vain. The rabbi downstairs might be guided by some mystical delusions. You can tell him I said that. Everyone has their own motivation. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But when we get together, the social anarchy of no one being more powerful than the other reduces us all to a bestial state, a state of beasts. And that's why monarchy is necessary. Monarchy is necessary to elevate us, to save us from that state of bestiality, to Hobbes. That's why we need a state.
Wait 1 second.
Monarchy without justification is a state of bestiality. Monarchy or government that doesn't have any enlightened reason, principle, motivation, is itself bestial, and therefore he writes there must be another origin story, another justification for government, and then he'll talk on the next page about what power actually looks like, what political power is. Political power, as he writes here, and then I'll throw it back to you, and then I want to get to the state of nature. I just kept underlining everything here, mainly because of the moment we're living in. I kept thinking like, yeah, that matters. What does the state do? Part 3 right here. Political power is making laws with the power to enforce it unto death, the power to regulate and preserve property, money,
Okay.
to employ the force of the community in the execution of rules. Like we can bring other people to say, this is what we're doing, we make decisions. And look at the last one, the defense of the Commonwealth from foreign injury. And this only for the public good. Putting the public good, the common weal, which is the heart of a commonwealth, some interest that rises, and I've been talking to you about this ad nauseum in Twitter, on various chats, that are how difficult this is, that there is a common good, the defense of which, whether it's from a microbial enemy, an enemy that we can't see because it's a virus, or a militant enemy, an army, a militant enemy, an army that comes to us in a navy, but that the state is that body that is created first for enlightenment reasons, but also has this power, defense of the Commonwealth from foreign injury. That is what political power does. When that power is abdicated, when the government doesn't protect us, it doesn't do these other things also, but when it doesn't protect us, that is a collapse of government. And I'm thinking like, yeah, absolutely, that's right. I want to like put this in like a little letter and send this in an email to, I don't know, to Downing Street or to the White House or to the governor of Texas. That's it. That's what government does. And this is the spiritual father of America. This is the godfather, the political philosopher who was a hero to Thomas Jefferson, who was a hero to James Madison, who created the spirit of the American Revolution and of Western democracy and the world that all of us are now living in, when we're asking like, wait, does the government have that power or not have that power? What's the balance between individual and the common good. And like, this is the Bible to them. This is the text. This is it. And we can keep going, but that was the first one where I was like, that's why I started highlighting everything, and I realized this is not helpful. Let me call Bill.
No, I first of all, I think
I'm gonna unshare it, and I'll go back to share in a minute because it's better for the it's better for the students to look at you, unless you want to see it. Do you want to? Should I keep it sharing?
No, I don't need to see it now.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, he's such a beautiful writer, and I think we miss a little bit of the beauty of his writing because he writes so simply. And this gets into a kind of conceptual issue as well, that the things that he says seem so obvious to us in some way.
We lived it. We live in this world.
We forget, exactly. We forget that he invented it and the world that we live in. Although I think from another perspective, sometimes my children, they are very skeptical about my political idealism. And I think part of that is because you and I, Dr. Feldman, you and I actually, we still lived in an America where those ideals were operative. And I think idealism here died 10 or 15 years ago, or I don't know, maybe, I don't know when it died, but it died here. I think it has to do with the persistence of the current government to have one government in place for so long. But you and I still lived in that time where that Jeffersonian ideal, going back to Locke, was something that we lived and loved and wanted to protect. And I think now we either don't, I don't know, maybe help me with this. I think we take it for granted now. But we also are, since we take it for granted, we're not so aware that it's actually being eroded, and we might find ourselves in a very different situation in a year, 5 years, a month, who knows, right?
And we're in a moment where everything is uncertain. So many of us and people around the world are having trouble understanding day to day what's happening in this given moment, that it makes it nearly impossible to predict what will happen after this. But one guiding light is to look at the past and see what has happened in the past. Locke, as you said earlier, is not a revolutionary. He's not someone who wants to overthrow everything. He's not a radical. He's actually an institutionalist, someone who wants to preserve what he saw as good. He said England almost came to crisis, and I will describe the world that was necessary, a kind of guardrail to preserve it from that. And what was I going to say? Oh, and to what will come after? But it is crystal clear to me. I know you said this as well. This is the historical moment of most of our lifetimes. God forbid it should get worse than this. And this will have major architectural changes that we can't foresee now, but they are coming. It could be a return to a world of Locke, of enlightened, rational, social organization. It could be something worse. Nobody really knows. But this is a time when the next few years, and our students are going to be part of it. They're entering into adulthood. They're entering into responsible citizenship. They're entering into professions. Some of them will go into the classroom. We always know that, which has its own responsibility, in which they will have a hand in shaping what comes next. Because the old order is part of what brought us this. The virus. I've been saying it all the time. The virus is an act of. It's almost like an act. It's not obviously not an act of God. I mean that as it's a force majeure, as they say in the insurance industry. It's an act of not even biology. It's just genetic code. It's just like a mechanism of nature. It's been accelerated by humans. It's been accelerated by a lot of malfeasance, bad judgment, misunderstanding the past. All kinds of forces that are bad, and what will bring us back from it. I've been saying to students, and I even said this, I might have insinuated this to you. What allows it to spread, is our desire, our kind of addiction to social interaction, to being social beings, social animals and species. What will make it stop and what will create a safer world afterwards is another property of humanity, the one that was most important to John Locke, which is reason. That we can think and we can share thought with each other. And that's what literature, that's what language is. That we can find ways to cooperate, to think of the smart idea, the smartest way, the smartest path forward, and we can learn from each other. We should get into the state of nature, but there's. I mean, I can stop. We can do this on every single chapter. They're like 18.
I just wanted to mention one more thing, which I think is really important. I asked before what the difference is between rights and liberty, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And liberty for Milton entailed a kind of active participation in the creation of a commonwealth. And we talked about the ways in which, when Milton imagines his ideal commonwealth, even though it's relatively tolerant, it really includes only a certain kind of people. It was a liberty to be a Protestant Englishman. Now, there were all kinds of different Protestants, of course, so it was really quite inclusive. Now, what's changing? Now, Dr. Feldman mentioned the state protecting the outside, but what does the state look like on the inside? And that's really the letter of toleration. That is this public sphere that we're going to create, and this is the great American creation, and it's really nowhere else in the world, right? Is this neutral public sphere, meaning those enthusiasms, those intensities that you want to pursue, do them at home. Don't do them in the public sphere. Milton says, realize your liberty in the public sphere and create that public sphere. Locke is much more conservative. There's a difference, as Dr. Feldman knows, between two kinds of liberty. One is called positive liberty, that's Milton's. One is called negative liberty, that's Locke's. Positive liberty is where I take on the responsibility to change the community that I'm part of. It's a very inspirational idea of liberty, but part of the problem is if other people don't have the same idea of what that entails, you're going to have conflict. That's where Locke steps in and says, of course, we're actually going to have conflict, right? There is going to be conflict. So he says we have to push off that positive liberty, as much ideally as it sounds great. And we have to embrace an idea of negative liberty. Now, positive liberty involves just that liberty. Negative liberty involves what Locke invokes in the beginning of the second treatise, rights. What do rights mean? I have the right for you not to get in my face. That's my right. You have to let me, I want to do whatever I want to do in my house. I don't know, stand upside down naked and recite, 14 different languages, in holy languages. Do it in your house, but don't try to come into the public sphere and tell people that that has to be a universal practice. That's really what Dr. Feldman was talking about, the state. That state externally protects from foreign powers. That state internally protects us from each other and allows what you were just talking about, this rational conversation to take place.
Excellent. And religious enthusiasm is acceptable, and to Locke, who was a religious himself, even desirable, but it needs to occur in a private domain, meaning not through the machinery of the state.
So that's where we get the American idea of church and state, I guess. The separation of church and state.
Exactly, and it's the idea of church and state stems from the letter on toleration, and it's not in a way. It's not meant to, as critics, as some evangelists today think, a way to blunt religion, to quash religion, to reject religion. It's not at all. It's actually meant to protect religion by keeping it outside of, by restraining it from the public sphere.
It's interesting because it is exactly the opposite of what people would say here, and what you just said about America. It's actually by legitimizing those private communities, we're inviting them to be part of a conversation, right? That is, we're saying, you do what you do in your private sphere and generate whatever kinds of meaning and possible visions of the future that you want, and then come together with other people and be in conversation with them.
Yeah. And one of the contradictions, I don't know, this is a very complicated matter of the letter on toleration, and then we can get back to the second treatise, is that it has a great deal of intolerance in Locke's own language. He has intolerance for atheists, who thought would just create chaos. Intolerance for Catholics, intolerance for what he calls Mohammedans, for Muslims. And the latter two, the consensus view of scholars, that it's not personal animus. He may have had some animus against Catholics, but rather it comes from the sense of a fear of evangelism, a fear of that these peoples to him, Muslims and Catholics, don't take offense because some of you are among those groups, but that Catholics and Muslims are evangelical. They cannot be simply satisfied. This is just to Locke. I'm just describing what he says, that evangelical groups are always sort of invading, or they're going into the public. If you're an evangelical, you are going into the public sphere, and you're trying to say, well, everyone should be like me.
And evangelical means literally to spread the news.
To try to convert other people.
Right.
In his day, when Protestantism was only about 200 years old, he couldn't imagine that one of the most enthusiastic, to use that word that you often use in a kind of in a scholarly way, but some of the most inveterate evangelicals would turn out to be Protestants, which is the case that the world that we live in, where now the Protestants, especially like in the United States, where the Christian right, they're all Protestant Baptists. They are the ones who say like down with the Church of State. In his day, where Protestantism was a minority group in the world of Christians, a minority of Christians, it was very important to him to safeguard the state from evangelical Christian and also Muslim beliefs. So that's the kind of intolerance that is kind of contradictory in the letter of toleration. He doesn't like an atheist. He doesn't. He has no toleration for these other groups. But it comes out of his suspicion about the act of converting. Of my religion is so important that I have to get everyone else into it, and I will use all available means. All right, rights. I'm going to go back now to the state of nature, just because I think it is interesting, and we could talk more about what you were saying. This rhetoric, and it's beautiful. His writing is beautiful. It is crystal clear.
Right.
To understand political power, right, and derive it from its original, we must consider what state all men are naturally in. And we talked about. This is very useful because I talked about it very at length with the students about Hobbes, how Hobbes understands who we are, and therefore what state, what organization, what society should be based on this account of people. And here's Locke's version: a state of perfect freedom. There's that word again. Liberty, freedom.
Where are you? Which on the
This is the beginning of chapter 2, right down here. So this is how I do things with the students. I don't know if it's useful or not, but this is how I've been doing things. Way to guide everyone exactly.
Right, yeah.
A state of perfect freedom in order that their actions and dispose of their positions and persons they think that you can do whatever you want. That is the natural state of affairs. That you have a natural right. These are the terms Jefferson calls it the inalienable right given to humans by their creator, to man by their creator. You have a natural right that is created by the Lord into the state of nature, into the way things are, that you can do whatever you want and do with anything that belongs to you, whatever you want, without asking leave. You don't have to ask anyone else for permission. When does this become a problem? When what you do hurts me, and this is how we'll get to the corona in just a minute. Also, what is the state of nature? Not just that you have complete freedom in your own domain. Second paragraph here. It is also a state of equality. This is mind-blowing because, of course, he couldn't see blacks, women, others as equal, but this is the rhetoric that he created that then suffuses Jefferson's American creed written into the Declaration of Independence, that equality is natural. Nature is equal. People are not much more, Hobbes talks about people are not much more smart or strong than one another, but rather, as Locke says, a state also of equality is the state of nature, and all the power and jurisdiction is reciprocal. No one has more freedom than anyone else. Some people are born a little higher ranks, some of others, but everyone has the same abilities, and by that he means the same reason, the same faculties of reason. We are all, he's an Enlightenment thinker, he was a doctor, he wrote, you said earlier how he was a philosopher, Locke had so many different hats, but they were all guided by a principle of reason, of thought, of observation, and therefore no one has any more rights than anyone else. Nature has made us all equal. And here, the next page, I sent this out to you a little earlier today. Although there is the state of freedom, it is not a state of license, part 6. It doesn't allow me to hurt you. And I've been reading this paragraph a few times over the last day or two. Though man has an uncontrollable liberty, nature has made us has uncontrollable liberty in my own person, my own possessions. I don't have liberty to destroy myself or anything that belongs to me when, as he says here, when it can hurt the larger society. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it. It obliges everyone, and this is by reason, by that law that teaches all mankind who but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possession. That's the formula that becomes, in Jefferson's version, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. For men being all the workmanship of the wise maker, all men are created by God. All humans are created by God. We all belong to God. This is his religious doctrine. We really do belong to God. We're all really his property and made to last doing God's pleasure, not one another. We don't belong to another. And we all are furnished with like faculties of reason. And here's the key part. We share all in one community of nature. Well, Lord, we know that is more true at this moment when the entire earth is united because we all have the same biology. We are all vulnerable as much as one another to infection, to this virus. And that's because our DNA is almost all identical one to another. There cannot be supposed any such subordination among us that may authorize us to destroy another. No one is higher than one another. No one is smarter. No one is more important than one another to allow us, to give us license to cause harm to anyone else, as if I could just do whatever I want for another's uses. You can try to put this on the Stiebel doorway. And this I find eerily, uncannily parallel to classic sources that I know exist in the Quran. Would they come from the Mishnah in Sanhedrin of preserving a life? Everyone, as he is bound, this is the Locke liberal philosophy version. Everyone as he is bound to preserve himself and not to quit his station willfully. So by the like reason, when his own preservation comes not in competition, ought he, as much as he can, to preserve the rest of mankind. Just as you have freedom to do whatever you want, the state of nature gives everyone a duty, a responsibility that you can't hurt anyone else. And each of us has, what does he call it? He is bound, a responsibility not to hurt anyone else. Each of us, we're trying to preserve ourselves. We're also preserving all of humanity. This is an opportunity. This crazy emergency state is one in which, by preserving yourself, by doing what is safe for yourself, you are also preserving the rest of mankind. From that formula comes Locke's idea about government, about the responsibility that government is going to be. Government to him is the institution, it's the organization, is the body, the structure that acts on this principle. That because I can't just do whatever I want to anyone, I'm not allowed to do what I want to anyone else. Just one second, which is an important part here. And therefore, government is going to sort of be the police of all this. All right, that's my idea. You can say what you want, and then we'll let the students go.
No,
And I kept doing this on every single page. You can see I did this on every page. I'm like, yeah, that's what we're talking about. Although Locke is not talking about crises, he's talking about every day, the sort of the genetics, the basic structure of government. I find what he's saying, the structure of the self, which is how I'm doing this in a literature course, because this is the creation of the private sphere, individual versus society, ordinary people. That is what creates novels. That's what creates literature. That's what creates the 18th century. But here he's saying things that I find so relevant, so important, so crucial for us to bear in mind during these scary days.
Right. No, I really, to act, I just never thought of it in this way. It's really, Locke is articulating this idea. He's expressing this idea that you should actually act as if the world were created for you. That's the source in the Talmud.
The same selfishness in Leviathan also, that we are all selfish.
Yeah, but I think the way you're understanding Locke, and I'm going back and re-understanding the passage from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, from the Talmud, that you act as if the world is created for you, but you also act because of that. You have responsibility over that world. And that's what the state is for Locke. You have responsibility over the world that you're in. And, you know, I think you're right. We live in political structures, even though they celebrate political liberty in name, and maybe may refer to Locke or Jefferson in name. We lose our sense of that responsibility. And it really is important. You know, our spheres are much smaller. We can't be responsible to the whole country. I mean, we can, I guess, in certain ways. I guess we can by not leaving the house, right?
This is the one moment in our lives where you can actually you can do something that you know, if you're the last home, you're the last street where the virus, hopefully that virus will eventually be eradicated. That seems extremely rosy and unlikely at the moment. But let's say in a few years, some miracle of science allows this to be the case. It's only on your street. You can preserve the entirety of mankind by acting rationally and responsibly, by acting for the common good.
Let's go for it. This was very inspiring from you, Dr. Feldman. Thank you.
Any other final thoughts for the students in terms of getting through this crazy period? We're going to have a break anyway. There's a mandated vacation.
You know what I would say to the students?
Yeah.
I would say to the students, if your instructors, we have a great department at Bar Ilan, and we had a meeting last weekend, and we're all really, really committed as a department to getting through this together and to getting through this with you. I think part of that is talk to your instructors, right? If you're having issues, don't be shy, right? This is not a time to be shy. So, I mean, we know from our meetings that we have online. I was in a 4-hour meeting on Sunday in the rector's office, I mean, at home. Boy, was I going out of my mind, right? It's really difficult. And if you try to, I mean, I was just doing other things, meaning I was not even trying to concentrate. If you're trying to concentrate, it's very, very hard. And I think we really need your feedback. So Dr. Feldman and I don't, I mean, you have Dr. Feldman right now, but in your other classes, you know,
we have no ego about this. Tell us tell us how you're feeling. It's important. Tell us what's working, what's not working.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, we're not doing this. We are, you know, we are, as Professor Kolbrener said at the beginning, we're in the same situation as everyone. But what we do in this classroom, this virtual classroom, is for you, and that's it. You know, don't worry about professors' egos, and don't worry about grades and assessment. You deserve a huge amount of credit for showing up. I've been saying that at the start and end of every class. You're heroic for doing this, and maybe something meaningful will even come out of it. That seems like extremely optimistic at this point. Crazier things have happened. Locke's philosophy of the modern state came out of a lifetime of one disaster after another.
Okay, so we'll chop there. We'll cut it there.
I'm going to stop this off. Okay, everyone. Thanks for watching. Okay.